So this is the fender that I got to replace the one that I removed. As you can see, the inner fender goes all the way to this body lip and seamless all the way in. There is a little logo here. It's Aries, the same company that makes the outer fenders. But when I put the coilovers in, I can actually cover that logo and weld in a piece or something like that. But for now, this is really working out well. It's got two bolts that bolt up to mounts on the frame, and then it uses the same holes, or I think the same holes, that the outer fenders use. So I think it'll be really good. These were a lot more expensive though. They were over twice what the ones I took out are, but I think they're much better. So they're twice as good, so they're worth twice as much, I guess. I've got the outer fenders back on. You can see how well they're integrated and how well it will now seal. You don't have any sort of a gap right from the outer fender to the inner fender and all the way in. Much better than it was before. I'm glad I went this direction, even though it cost a lot more. Totally worth it. Well, it's been about a week and a half since I was here, and so getting back into the project again after a bit of a vacation. It's always interesting. You always forget where you were on a project and try to remember so you can get back to it. I'm basically working on the ECM, the throttle pedal, which is these wires here. I'm going to have to do a bulkhead connector through the body of the ECM box, and then I'll route that to the driver's pedal, of course. I'll work on that, and then I decided, while I was on vacation, I was thinking about it, decided to label each of these wires with the pin number that they are, because I have a table that shows me what each wire does. Some of these I know exactly what they are and I will be using them. Other ones I'm not sure, and I have to look at that pin diagram. Like this one, for instance, I didn't know what it was when I took it off, so I have to look up the pin. So I'll label each of these wires with the pin number. That way I can interface to the ECM based on those wires and the wiring diagram that I have. I know there's one of the wires which is a high idle. It kicks on the high RPM idle, I think during like engine warm-up in the cold, and when you turn on defrost, it just kicks that high idle on. So I will probably use that for an idle up switch, and yeah, I got to figure out what some of the rest of them do, but I'm going to start by getting the ECM box and getting the ECM so it can be securely mounted, and then I will figure out where my bulkhead connectors have to go for the throttle pedal, and then the key ignition start signal bulkhead connector, and then one more for the rest of the interfaces. And there'll be a large gauge hot and a large gauge ground. So this red and green is the hots, and these browns are the grounds. So those will go to a common rail inside the box. I'll have lugs that I'll tie these down to, and then I'll probably have a number 6 gauge or maybe a number 8 gauge come in and tie into these. These are like 12s, I think. I feel like about 12s. So yeah, and then this is the main relay, which I'm actually going to replace. This is 20 years old, so, or getting close to that, so time to replace it, even though it works just fine. This is like the main relay that fires and stays on while the ignition is on. So you can imagine after 20 years it's probably starting to wear out or getting close to being worn out. So I'm going to buy a brand new OEM main relay, just so I don't have to worry about it. And this will be mounted inside the ECM box if there's room. I think there is. So I'll tinker around with that today and also tomorrow. And hopefully by the end of the weekend I'll be able to have this ECM actually mounted where it's supposed to be, on the other side of the firewall inside the box. and it'll be one step closer to getting some fluids in this engine and getting the engine fired up. So now I have all of these wires labeled. So each one is labeled with the pin number on the connector, and then I have a pinout diagram so that I could figure out what goes to what. And I separated them into a couple of different categories. So we basically have the engine sensors go here. So the engine, everything is connected to the engine goes here. So it's like the O2 sensors and the mass airflow sensor and all that. They're right there. This is the throttle pedal, and it just goes down to the throttle connector right now. These are the hot and the ground, the high amperage hot and ground. And this is what I've just done. So I separated these into three categories. One category only having one wire. So this wire just goes to the 219 relay. So this will stay in the box, so I don't need to route it outside the box. These wires go back into basically the chassis. So these are things like there's this vehicle speed sensor in here, things like goes to the starter wire, things like that. That's what these are, glow plug relays, the stuff I need on the engine. This group of wires is everything that I need under the dash, basically. So under the dash, on the engine, inside the box, to the engine, to the throttle pedal, power. Simple. And just since I'm talking about it, the other connector is very simple as well. It basically just goes to the engine. There's a couple of things that need power separately, but it just basically just goes to the engine. So this one's the simplest. Alright, so I'm happy with that. That took me about an hour and a half, but now I know what goes where. So now I'm going to pretty it up and see if I can make it fit in the box. So something pretty simple. This is the ECM box. I took a piece of tubular steel, really small, 4 inches long, and did some nut inserts in here, and then screwed through here with some M4, little M4 nuts, bolts. And so this is the stop to keep the ECM from coming out this way, and then this is just a piece of an old aluminum bracket that I wasn't using for something. I think it came with the intercooler, but I just saved it. So I bent it to fit this profile of the ECM. This screw is one of the mounting points for this, so this will hold the ECM, keep the ECM from moving. There's just barely enough room to put the wires on the top here, the ECM connectors. Once they're on, I can insert this under the ECM under here, and then tighten this down, and it should secure the ECM very, very securely and well, and allow me to do whatever I need to do. There's just barely enough room for that relay there. I also have to have power in here, so I probably will end up putting the power along here or along here, but yeah, it's coming along. The worst come to worst, I'd put the power on the outside, but yeah, it's coming along. I think it's gonna work. So now I'm gonna put the box back in the Jeep, and then I will probably mount the ECM and route the wires through, and then start worrying about the relays and stuff. The ECM box is starting to come together. I've got it mounted here. Temporarily have these wires here just kind of set to the side so they're not in the way while I'm working on the main 219 relay. So what I've done, these are little solder seal joints. I don't know if you can see it very well, but they have a heat shrink and they've got solder inside them, so you heat them up and they seal and they solder the joint. And here's one getting ready to go on. I'm going to combine these two with this wire. So the idea is that this 219 relay receives its trigger on signal from the ECM, which is one of those wires there, and then it just switches a high, like a 30 amp input to two outputs, and what's used to be done in the original vehicle was one powered the ECM, one powered all the rest of the key-on accessories. I'm going to do things a little differently. I'm actually going to have two key-on relays, and that's because I want to be able to have accessories on but ECM off at various times. So what I'm going to end up doing is using both of these outputs to both power the ECM and the engine accessories. So one here, key on, then splits into two of the ECM powers. The other one is going to split into one ECM power and one wire, the green and the red, which is the like Volkswagen key on color code. It'll go back out to the engine compartment, and that'll be where I'll pull power for the like the oxygen sensor heater, for the ASV actuator, for the glow plug relays and stuff like that. So those are the key on circuits. So this will be attached to this, and then I'll take this little wire, attach it to there, and then make it look all nice and pretty, and attach the little relay there inside the box. And that's really all that's in this box, other than of course ground. So I have 3 grounds here. I've got to run a ground wire back out to the engine bay, but that's all that's in here. Back in the front, I still have a lot of cleaning up to do. So you can see that you know, the engine wiring harness is just going to go through here, and there'll be, of course, be a protective rubber grommet here and a seal so that nothing can get through here. And there'll be these wires here come out to additional things, like, you know, one of these is goes to like the that kicks the glow plug relay on and various things like that. This is the main power in, and this will be the key on wire. So there'll be a fuse box out here and a battery out here, etc. And then of course I'll clean up all these wiring harnesses. Right now they're in the rough general location, but they need to all be combined and made to look nice and put sheaths on them and everything, but we're getting there. The throttle pedal is from the original Passat, and of course it won't fit here. So I made this, which is just in a simple adapter, just made out of sheet steel. I have 4 clock position bolts here so that I can, you know, adjust it so that it, if I don't like the position, I can move it. I figured I'd put them in there while I was making it, so I didn't have to do it later. And then, so this bolts onto the original Jeep pedal bolts, and then the pedal bolts onto it. And I'll show you how that looks in a minute. And here is what it looks like installed. Of course, I can adjust it left and right to kind of line it up, but I think that's probably where I want to have it. I haven't painted the bracket, but I'll do that later when I'm sure I don't need to move it around anymore. But yeah, so that took a surprisingly long time to do, really. So I wanted to make it right, make it very solid, and make it precise. So it took a little while. Now I gotta run the wiring, and I've got a bulkhead connector that I'm going to be connecting up to the ECM. Probably not going to do that right now, but I'll run the throttle controls through the bulkhead, but I'll probably get it started before I do all that. I've got to make a mounting bracket for this. It needs to mount in this position along the inside of the fender well in the front of the Jeep, and then these lines here will go down to the oil filter adapter. So basically I need to go like that. So this is a bracket that actually came from my seats, and I think I can actually shorten it, take off all the unnecessary stuff, and make a bracket out of it. So I'm gonna try and do that. I think I'll take all the extra junk off of it and cut it to the size I need and weld it back together. So we'll see how that goes. So this is shortened and welded back together. You can See, it just kind of goes there. Well, I'm pretty happy with this. Here's my new bracket. Here's the remote oil filter housing. The high point of the system is here, which is like a bleeder valve. I can actually take that out and this out to bleed any air out of the system. I still need to route lines to a oil cooler at some point, but this is going to be a while. I'm not going to worry about it right now. I'll just bypass this for now. But as you can see here, these aren't actually clamped down yet, but as you can see, I've got my lines and some hose separators, and it goes right there into the oil housing there. And the only thing I really have to do here is maybe mount some sort of something to keep it away from this inner fender so it doesn't rattle. But once I do that, this one here should never touch anything. There's enough flex in the system so when the engine flexes or moves side to side, it won't hurt anything. These don't touch the fender here, and yeah. So when I put the diamond plate back on, I'll cut it around these so that it fits. And then ultimately I'll have some sort of a catch can type assembly under here so that I can drain any oil right out when I replace the filter. But yeah, it's coming together good. I'm going to thread on my filter. And there we go. Yep, there's my remote filter.